Well, we'll go on a break and we'll return with another issue. Join us again.
As directed by the leadership of the House of Representatives, 5 committees meet with the Minister of Information, Lai Mohammed, to unravel the circumstances leading to the Twitter suspension and its legality.
The pattern of choice.
The minister begins by explaining the reasons behind the suspension and alleges complicity of Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey in the EndSARS protest.
The same Twitter played a very unsavory role by making available its platform to retweet, not just retweet the messages of the EndSARS protesters, but raising funds for the EndSARS protesters before it was hijacked by hoodlums. Jack Dorsey crowdfunded the activities of EndSARS. That's why we believe that Twitter's mission in Nigeria is suspect.
He goes further to quote laws which empowered the federal government to issue the suspension.
But until so incorporated, the foreign company shall not carry on business in Nigeria or exercise any powers of a registered company. That's the section 78(1) of the Companies and Allied Matters Act 2020.
But lawmakers question the timing of the suspension, which came just after the president's tweet was taken down, and are also concerned about the negative impact on businesses which depend on Twitter.
The pressure that people have is that the Twitter took down a statement that was made by the president, just like how they took down a statement that was made by Donald Trump of America.
We have to consider the economic dethronement of the mass of Nigerian youths who live and survive trading on Twitter, doing so many other things. We did not suspend the activities of Twitter because they deleted Mr. President's tweet. Not at all. Have we taken into consideration Nigerians doing business on Twitter? And the answer is yes. There are other platforms, Facebook, Google Hangout, WhatsApp, for people to use.
The Minister of Information says that the federal government has approved a committee to engage with Twitter, and that as part of the conditions for lifting the suspension, Twitter must first register with the Corporate Affairs Commission and get a license, and that subsequently all the conditions will follow. Terry Ikumi, Channels Television News.
Well, the conversation around Twitter and whether or not it's been banned, suspended, why that happened is not going away anytime soon. Don't forget that recently the ECOWAS court had a ruling stopping the Nigerian government from prosecuting those who insist on still using Twitter despite the ban or suspension, whichever one you prefer. Well, we have with us this morning Mr. Eni Akinshola, who's the advisor, lead publicity executive, Agogo Publishers. You're welcome to Sunrise Early this morning.
My pleasure, Julia. Good morning.
Well, you are an information man, and you have also been, you've been a journalist, and also you've been on the other side, for lack of a better term to use now, as if there were two sides. But yes, if one were to interpret it in that manner, did you see this coming in terms of government interface with Twitter and how offended it felt when the president's tweet was pulled down?
I think we started on a very wrong footing. I mean, government and Twitter. The issue was not a government thing. It was Mr. or President Muhammad Buhari in his capacity. That tweet was his personal tweet, quote and unquote. And if he had issues with Twitter's pulling down, I think the first thing should have been to engage with Twitter, not to suspend Twitter and its activity in Nigeria. Other Gaffs followed immediately. Other Goofs followed. Where we are today, therefore, is what can we get from it?
Now, I want you to enumerate what you consider the other Goofs.
The other Goofs was that we saw the Honorable Minister of Information coming to explain some things and then banning, quote unquote, or suspending. Was it a ban? Was it a suspension? Then the Honorable Attorney General coming to say that whoever uses alternatives will be, these are Goofs and Gaffs that were unnecessary. Immediately, the ban or suspension was announced. What ought to follow after the first Gaff is engagement with Twitter. How do we do it? Then other Gaffs, like, okay, we want to regulate OTPs, all this. It's the other Goofs and Gaffs. Those things could come outside of this crisis.
Why do you consider them Gaffs?
What I mean is if Twitter did not have any issue with the president, would they have come out? If yes, why did they come out around that point? So when you muddle the waters, you create confusion in the populace, there is a poor understanding of your intentions, and people can go wrong wired with the ideas of what you are trying to do. If government wanted to regulate practitioners in the social media space, it should be an action that will be taken outside of Mr. President's altercation with Twitter. So these are Goofs and Gaffs. But as I've said, maybe they have paused, there's a rewind, and maybe they are restarting. But I also saw a lot of funny things. If the group that is to represent Nigeria with Twitter, we should have tech guys who understand how this works, not necessarily political office holders. Maybe a lawyer to fine-tune other things, but tech guys who understand what benefits there are for Nigerians, who understand what opportunities there are for Nigerians, and who could leverage on this opportunity to negotiate what is best for our cyberspace, for our economy, and for our security. But what do we have? People probably don't run their own Twitter account. People probably don't have the most basic knowledge of social media. But that is us.
So it would seem that, well, some people will say that generally the problem that has been raised, even though the minister, Alhaji Lai Mohammed, continues to insist that it is not because Twitter pulled down the president's tweet, that's the reason why they have clamped down on the social media app in Nigeria. Even though he continues to insist
believe that you believe another thing.
Well, I don't know about you, but that's what he says.
Okay.
There have been problems in general with governments, and not just governments, but let's say governments, countries, nations, those who deal with security and social media. It's not a uniquely Nigerian problem, so to speak. How do you think that, as a developing nation, our problems seem to be a little more compound? I mean, we have brought in security into the matter, and as in Nigeria here, staying as one, secession and all those manner of talks, there are huge fears of that, and the power that social media could wield, and even the power that external forces could wield through social media. What are your thoughts on that as we navigate, as we're moving forward in this technologically driven age?
The very basic thing about governance and information is openness. If we have the right kind of relationship between the government and the governed, the fear of manipulation is drastically reduced. I didn't say eliminated. It's drastically reduced. When government says things, people believe that for what it is. People see government as representing them truly and truly. That's the very basic thing. The other thing is that in societies where there are problems managing social media, they do not manage it on the social media. They go below the radar, get their acts right, get their policies well formulated, get their plans of action well articulated, then take action. But here, we start our own from the public. We voice out, then we begin to think of how we do it. That's the difference. In what way are we going to use the social media to help tackle insecurity? That ought to have been discussed, outlined. The methods ought to be engaged, ought to have been done. In what way are we going to use social media regulation to correct insecurity problems? That ought to have been outlined. But we strike first, then look at the reaction before we think. So that's the difference between us and other societies. If there were no issues between Twitter and Mr. President, and all these things have been outlined, government would have engaged society, interested members of society, core stakeholders, quote unquote, as they are called, and engage them. This is what we are thinking. And we discuss. There is an agreement. So when the policy is pushed out, it gets received almost immediately. So it will only be those who have extreme views that will be opposed to it. And those who have extreme view, anywhere in society, globally, are infinitesimal part of society. But when you do not engage those who have moderate views, when you do not engage the larger mass, those who have extreme views take over this airspace. In this conversation, I find it interesting, first and foremost, that you keep on saying if Twitter did not have any problems with Mr. President, or Mr. President did not have any problems with Twitter, it would seem that you are restricting it to these two people, when it would seem that it is the government of Nigeria that has now taken it on. But in this case, in the situation whereby the president's tweet was pulled down, do you think that that was did you see a problem with that in the first instance? It's not a big problem. Now, how do social media platforms... But it is a problem. It's not a big problem. If you pull down my own thing, it's a problem. I'm a citizen. If Twitter pulls down your thing, it's a problem. But it's not a big problem in the sense that such actions take place because people report those accounts. Twitter don't just wake up and take action. If I say something that people feel is offensive, people will report my account to Twitter. And Twitter will look at the algorithm. People will look at the inflow of information on that and take action. That is how it has always been. The same thing for Facebook. So it's when Twitter now takes action, you engage. Hello, this is what we have done. Why is this happening? Over 2-3 hours, that could be resolved. So it's taking down, there are rules of engagement with social media platforms. If you do so, and so number of people flag that, Twitter will act. Yeah, but in your own analysis, do you think that that tweet was problematic? It's not problematic in that these are private enterprises. There are rules. You come to my platform. No, I mean the tweet itself, the tweet that was pulled down. For me, it is. It is because we have a security situation on our hands. It is because we have had instances where much more damage has been done, and the utterances and body language of Mr. President was not that aggressive, was not that poignant, was not that active. It was passive, almost like supportive of those. So, and because we are, quote unquote, a thoroughly divided society, such utterances must weigh the ramifying effect of the outcome. And we had a history, a civil war that has dogged us in terms of, have we really forgotten it? Have we put it behind us? No. Some of the things around the civil war are still resonating with us. So I would think that Mr. President would be a little bit more introspective, a little bit more sober before reading such a tweet. Because we have seen the case of the Tutsis and Hutus. We have seen other societies where utterances trigger things. For instance, the dot thing statement of Mr. President. It looks harmless ordinarily, but it is harmful because we are divided, because we are mutually apprehensive of our actions, of our words, of our inactions. So this is not the time to be reckless, to be unguided in whatever we say or do. This is the time to be deliberately sober. Because this country, and I say this to everybody, I am one of those who believe that this country has a future, but not on the grounds under which we run it. Not under this. We have to rework it. We have to build confidence in the system. We have to believe that the Constitution is for all of us, irrespective of where you come from. And until we do that, utterances like that, rather than be seen on the face value, will be seen for its underlying meanings. So let's fast forward now from the president's statement, because he did not type that statement initially. It wasn't a statement released like we'll see press statements. It was a conversation
in context where INEC officials had gone to visit him and talk about the damage happening to a number of their facilities around the country, but particularly in the southeast of the country. And that's where he made that particular statement. Some people have made a differentiation between the president speaking off the cuff and the manner in which he spoke and when it was written. I don't know if you saw that differentiation. That is there. But then let's fast forward to where we currently are. I mean, according to you, the Gaffs and the Goofs that have now been made, and now we have a committee to engage with Twitter. But before that time, we saw some people who felt very aggrieved go to the ECOWAS court in the wake of the Attorney General saying they're going to prosecute those who still tweet, even though some people dared and said, Attorney General, we're waiting for you to come and arrest us. Because according to them, their laws, I mean, the laws upon which the Attorney General hopes to rely, which he still hasn't named, seem to be quite spurious. Nonetheless, some people are taking no chances and have gone to the ECOWAS court. Now, that ruling has come out. The Nigerian government says it is considering the ruling. They're still studying the judgment. But then they have begun to question is it the legality and the jurisdiction of the ECOWAS court? And some people wonder if that kind of court will hold any weight. I mean, the ruling from that sort of court will hold any weight, unless the weight that the members attach to it. What are your thoughts?
Since we are signatories to the protocols of ECOWAS, we are bound by it. But you see, I also don't see...
You're bound by it, but how much weight, how much importance have you attached to the ruling?
The weight we are ready to attach to it.
Indeed.
You see...
So do you think it was worthwhile going to get a judgment from that court, knowing that...
It is a good thing because it's an opportunity to resolve it rather than to complicate it. And I should think that what government should do is, look, now there's an opportunity to resolve it. Why not latch on that opportunity and say, okay, gentlemen, this is what the courts have said, though we have issues with it, but being Democrats, let us allow it the way, and then we'll walk on from there. It solves a lot of problems. It's a win-win for every one of us. It's a win-win for every one of us. You can even argue that, look, though we do not believe that the judgment is made in good conscience, you can just say a lot of things, but because we want to douse this tension, because we feel that our people have the right to voice out legitimately, let us move forward. But we keep on complicating simple things.
You have had cause to advise the head of a subnational government before, especially with regards to handling information. How do you think that, information sometimes gets out of hand and the situation gets beyond control, or it would seem that government is struggling to control it? What are the dynamics that happens behind the scenes?
When there are too many sources, outlets for information, there will be confusion. And I say this with all due respect. There are too many outlets for information for this government. For instance, there was no need for any Attorney General to come out to talk about what the President was handling. The Attorney General should give up legal, verified, constitutionally guaranteed legal opinion when asked. Otherwise, there are media minders of Mr. President who should sit down, plan, and release statements on behalf of Mr. President. Even Mr. President's speeches should be vetted by media minders, and with all due respect, there are very good hands involved there. But I don't know to what extent they have been involved in managing of information. I am sure from what I have seen that a lot of people talk out of the media team. From what I have seen, I've seen ministers say things that will end up not being the total truth. Meanwhile, there ought to be a clearinghouse for the information of government. In most cases, when it comes to the government, the Honorable Minister of Information is the one to voice out. But when it comes to the presidency, the principal is the media team, to be represented by who is the anchor point at that point. It could be this special advisor, it could be the senior social advisor, it could be whoever they want. It all depends on the level of engagement. You could make an essay, special assistant, to release a statement on behalf of the presidency, but it must have been well processed. So that while you are engaging an essay, is because of the value, the premium you place on who initiated the idea or what information you want to pass across. If it's high state information, then you are likely going to use the special advisor or senior social advisor. So it depends on the synergy within the system. I do not see such a synergy. I may be wrong, but I can tell you there are bright hands that I've seen, that I've worked with as a journalist. And recently I met one of them and I voiced my opinion on the issue that I may disagree with your principle on a number of things, but there are some things that I agree with. One, we can't release this country to the hands of people I call Ifunpa, Ibadi, or Tumokpo generals. We cannot release this country in the hands of warlords, street warlords. We must take hold of this country and get out of our problems by discussing them. Every war ends in a discussion somehow. Every war. In the religious era, in the Quran, in the Bible, in societies that are as old as time, every war ends in a discussion. So why not discuss before the war? My own thing is that let us engage. When people have issues, instead of demonizing them, engage them. And once you engage and you know that these are unreasonable people, let the society know the level, the extent of their unreasonableness. But we cannot be gravitating aimlessly towards the precipice because we are not thinking and we are not talking.
Have we made a storm out of a teacup with this suspension or ban on Twitter in Nigeria? Some people have said, oh, it's indicative of government's intolerance to opposition. Oh, it's indicative of government's intention to stifle free speech. You know, there have been all manner of things read into this ban on
we
Twitter.
Have not.
But
it is this and more. It is indicative of this. But what is more fundamental?
You believe that it is indicative of that?
This and more. What is more is this. We have failed to realize that the youth content of our population is high. Largely unengaged, largely unemployed. Some unemployable. Now, but most of these have found space within the social media to get engaged. I know of people who sell things on social media, young people who have no job, people who do network marketing on social media. Now, Twitter is the most active outlet for such. And you have cut off their means of survival, their means of engagement, their means of satiating their worries, their anxieties, their pressures. So it is much more than the fact that you are suppressing the right of the people to voice out. You are also suppressing their means of livelihood. People don't see it from that perspective. I know of young people who...
When that was put to the minister, he said, oh, they can go to other platforms. There's WhatsApp, there's Facebook, there's Instagram. They can do that. With
all due respect, the minister has a little understanding of this platform. I'm sorry. He's an elderly person and I defer to elders. I'm brought up that way. I'm configured to see elders. But part of the problem is that the minister really do not have an understanding of what is happening. He has informants who are also not giving him the right information or who he's not listening to. You cannot compare Twitter to Facebook or WhatsApp. You cannot. The factors, the reality under which they operate are different. A tweet in 10, 20 minutes can be engaged by a more global audience than a Facebook account. So these are things that we should just, I see it as some of the gaffs that we should not think about. And you see, I also heard this about we could develop local alternative. My own argument is not when you have a crisis that you start thinking of developing a local alternative. What have you been doing since the art was created? Why not thinking of local alternative? Why not engage these young people? Why not creating an IT hub all across the states and ask people, give them targets, fund them, and say, we want an alternative within so and so period.
So what are your thoughts now on the fact that we're beginning to think of licensing social media handles? I mean, there's been all that kind of argument, and it would seem that it's a valid one because a number of countries have been raising issue with giants like Google, saying that the advertisements they place in their countries, which are seen in their own countries, that Google needs to pay tax on them. And so we've seen lawsuits whereby these big tech giant companies are forced to now pay tax, you know, in some countries as a result of that. So do you think that this idea of trying to license you know, big tech in Nigeria will work for them to be able to operate?
I do not see a crime in attempting to make economic gains of this. I do not say a crime, but it must be well-reasoned, well thought out plans. You don't do this knee-jerk kind of thing and expect results. You must plan well. What if Twitter and they meet and say, let us discuss it, and you are not ready? You do not even know where you can. So it's a different thing. Let us reason well. Let us plan well before we take actions. I am not opposed to government giving out rules of engagement in the society, but they must be seen to be fair to all. They must not be seen to be born out of malice. They must not be anger-driven. They must be well-reasoned, well-rationed, well-thought-out policies and strategies of government to engage and to benefit for the society. But if it is to benefit, to protect the government against the people, then that is not right. The people should be protected against the government. The people who vested power in the government, and if insensible part of them, should not be the victims, while the government, who is there in representative capacity, should be the villain, or should be the one oppressing them. Pardon me. So once we think things out, once we reason them out, our actions will be seen to be altruistic, will be seen to be rational, will be seen to be acceptable to all, will not be seen as vindictive. And that's my argument. If government wants to engage with Twitter, with Google, with all this, let that be. But first and foremost, it should not be on this premise, on this basis. And let us engage first before we make noise. You see?
What do you think, in this engagement right now, do you think that we have sufficient leverage as a government, one? I'm sure, of course, we are a big market for a number of tech giants, and they should be interested in coming to Nigeria more specifically, as when you look at our numbers, the youth bulge, and even what's possible here. But do you think that so far so good, we have are we the kind of people that they can say, look, okay, you guys don't want us here, no problem. We simply black Nigeria out?
No right-thinking business entity will black out anybody. But when the cost of doing business threatens the overall cost of that business entity, you can take a decision to leave. So while we are pushing, we must do a SWOT analysis. We must do an opportunity cost of our engagement. If we drive them out, what do we gain as a society? That is, if you out-negotiate them, we outmaneuver them, and they feel that, wow, instead of doing this, we are not going to do it. Let's move out. What will be the loss to Nigeria, to our economy, to our society, to our youth? What will be the implication on our security? What will be on the social tension? Because we are going to release more young people into the society who have been disengaged from what I could call a distraction, quote and unquote. They engage now because there is nothing to do, and yet they are making life out of that. They eke out some means of livelihood from it. So you must consider all these options. Because if you try to negotiate with them and it becomes a threat to their business model, they will opt out. So we must factor in all this. That's why I say you need the experts, people who know the nitty-gritty of their actions. It is what you know that can really understand.
So you think that team needs to be reviewed, the team that should engage with
that team is a political team. That team is not a team that will get much out of, except, you know, if they have a backup team of experts and technocrats. And for me, I think the first thing is the expert and technocrat in meeting them first before you put political seal to it. Because when you put your first foot forward, you get concessions that are infinitesimal, concessions that will not add any value to you, and you bring it back home to your technical experts and they tell you you've got nothing.
Well, I'm sure a lot of Nigerians will sincerely hope that will not be the case.
I hope so.
But we have to say thank you so much for
My pleasure,
sharing
always.
your thoughts with us this morning. Eni Akinshola is an advisor, lead publicity executive at Google Publishers. Sunrise Daily will continue in a moment. Please stay with us.